All right, shalom aleichem, shavua tov, chodesh tov. We just entered Rosh Chodesh Av. Welcome to our weekly class on our SAGES. Even though the last few weeks we did not have a class, with B'sha'a tova mutzlachat, we are getting back. So I'll take you back a little bit to what we've done until today, because we haven't met for the last 3 weeks. A little while ago, we spoke about Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo, maybe close to 500 years ago. And from then, we slowly went into the generations until our day. We spoke about Achronim Ziv Livian. We spoke about the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim. And today we are going to touch a little bit the time of the Haskalah, Mendelssohn and stuff like that. But before we get there, I noticed that we never gave attention to Yehadut Teiman, the Yemeni Yehudim. And even though one time we touched them when we say that they sent an Igeret, a question to the Rambam, this was 800 years ago, but we still haven't seen one of the Hachaim that came out of Teiman. And I want to present to you someone that in the world of Kabbalah is considered very, very famous. Some even say that he was the reincarnation of Ari HaKadosh, the great Kabbalist. There are different opinions, but either way, his name was Rashash, Rabbi Shlomo Sharabi. He's a great Kabbalist. He was metaken a special sidur with kavanot latfilah. And his kavanot there, you see, you read one line, then the Mekubalim do these kavanot that take a long time, then they continue reading. It's very, very long. He's famous for his Kabbalah Naj, but what was his story? He has a phenomenal story, how he became a Rashash, how he became such a famous tzaddik. So he was working at a Bet Knesset of a Rav called Rav Gedalia Chayun. The Bet Knesset was the Yeshivat HaMekubalim, Yeshivat Bet El, and over there he was just the cleaning guy, the shamash, the helper. But he was a big Talmid Chacham, but secretly he was a tzaddik. Now, sometimes they would be learning, all the Mekubalim in that yeshiva, and at night, they would have a question. They would be left with a question. They didn't know what to do. So they would write down the question. So hopefully tomorrow they can answer it. They would come in the morning. They would open the book. They would see a piece of paper with the answer to their question. They said, wow, Eliyahu Navi is giving us answers. Amazing. And that's what they kept on doing. Every night question, they wake up in the morning, answer. What they did not know is this Rashash, this humble man that was serving them tea and coffee, knew all these answers to the great Shelot of the Mekubalim. Rabbi Shlomo Sharabi. Until one night, the daughter of Rav Gedalia Chayun, the Rosh Yeshiva, said, this is impossible. Something is happening here. I sense it. She stayed up all night behind the scenes, looking from the side at the book to see maybe something will happen. In the middle of the night, who does she see? No one less than this young man, Shlomo, Rashash. And the Rashash comes in, he sees the question, he writes the answer, he goes away. And then she goes to her father in the morning, Abba, you're not going to believe who's answering all your questions. The Rashash, this man that is serving us tea and coffee. What? It can be. He calls him over. Tell me, is it true? Oh, no. Shua Chamura, tell me. You have to tell me right now if it's true or not. Okay, yes, I answered the question. He says, up till now, you were serving us. Now you are our rabbi. We are all serving you. And this is how we became the Rashash and finally got the kavod. But we see that even in makom of such gedolim, mekubalim, there was such humility. No, everyone ran away from the kavod. They just cared about the Torah. These are the true Chachamim of us. So one of his students, this Rashash, was Hachida, which Hachida is a figure, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai, that we're going to give a lot of attention today. He was something special. I remember that when Rav Ben Chaim was talking about Rav Ovadia, when Rav Ovadia passed away, he said, since the days of Achida, we haven't seen such a gadol like Rav Ovadia Yosef that is passing away. So today we'll learn about this Chida. But before that, so we learned about Yadut Teiman, a little bit about the Rashash. I want to touch the Haskalah, the Tnuat Haskalah, Mendelssohn. We mentioned it last time. I don't know if it was recorded because there was some questions that were after the class, or it's worth mentioning again. We're talking around year 1800, something like that. His theory, Mendelssohn, was that we don't necessarily have to be irreligious. He saw himself as an Orthodox Jew, only he felt that there are too many barriers between us and the Goyim, and we don't have to be so different. We can open up. In fact, he even joined the philosophy contest. It was a competition, first prizes. He won the first prize. The second prize, actually, in that same competition of philosophy, there was a famous philosopher called Immanuel Kant. Maybe you've heard of him. And this philosopher came in second place, meaning our Jew, our Mendelssohn won the first place. So he had a lot of knowledge in philosophy, and it felt like, why are we closing the doors of religion? We could open up and still serve Hashem. How do we know that he failed, that his shita did not work? Because his children that came after him all left the ways of Hashem. Itnatzlu. They became Christians. And because they became Christians, therefore, it was clear that his path was not a right path. However, in his days, there was another big Rav, more or less in his days. His name was Harashar Hirsch, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. He also understood the feeling that, we're so different from the Goyim, and maybe there are doors that need to be open, but he did his, let's call it a modern Jewish lifestyle, and a little bit different than Mendelssohn, and he succeeded. And I want to quote to you what he says about the Reformim, the people in his generation that already started making big changes in Judaism because they felt to themselves like this is what's going to keep us in peace with the Goyim. And he says like this, listen to this quote. ישנם בינינו כאלה אשר בראותם את מספר הנאמנים בבריתו של הקדוש ברוך הוא הולך ופוחת, meaning there are some of us that see that those that are hanging on to הקדוש ברוך הוא is a number that is getting smaller and smaller, ומספר הבוגדים הולך ומתרבה, and those who go against הקדוש ברוך הוא הולך ומתרבה, בראותם כי הלבבות מתמעטים, and they see that the hearts are מתמעטים, the heart is weakened to עבודת השם, ואין להם כוח לעמוד בפני התאוות, and these people, they don't have strength to stand against their תאוות, their lusts, והניסיונות הקשים, חושבים, what do these people think when they see all these people that are weakening with their עבודת השם? כי אנו מתדלדלים, that those that really serve Hashem, they're also weakening. They're also becoming smaller and smaller amounts. Ki karev kitzenu. They think that our doomsday is around and nothing is going to be left from Orthodox Judaism. It's only going to be reforms from now. That's what people think. Avdat tikvatenu. But what did he say to these people? Al ha'anashim ha'ele le'avin. Ki davka ele shenitnasu. Specifically these that had these nisyonot kashim, v'nimtzeu shlemim, and were able to hang on to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though everybody around them was falling and breaking down and doing their avonot, שעברו עליהם שערות נורות ונתקיימו, that the big storms of life surrounded them, but they still were able to hang on, שלא הלכו בעצת רשעים, they did not follow עצת רשעים, ולא ניתנו אחר תעתועי המתאים, that did not surrender to the misleading ways that the misleaders were leading them to, הם שיביאו לידי תחייה רוחנית, those that were hanging on, they are going to revive us. They're going to keep on holding to the Orthodox Judaism and bring us to the right path. דוגמת התחייה הראשונה, just like בצאת ישראל ממצרים. Those that hang on to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In Makat Choshech, they say that 80% of the Jews died themselves. Not everybody was with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Those who hung on succeeded. And he's giving the Rashar Hirsch a lot of power to the Orthodox Jews that feel like everyone around us is weakening. Maybe they're in the right path. We've become a minority. He says, no, we, the ones that are hanging on to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the path is going to continue in our way. And Baruch Hashem, he was right. So this is a nice quote that we have from Harashal Hirsch. I lived at the time. Again, I want to go a little bit backwards. We're looking at 1743. That's the date that Hachaim הקדוש passed away. I want to touch Hachaim הקדוש as well, because just like we mentioned in the beginning that the Rashash, the Jewish Yemenite Mekubal, was the rabbi of Achidah, which we're going to talk about today. Another one of his rabbis was Hachaim HaKadosh, which I'm sure all of you have heard of. So to get to the Chidah, we're touching his rabbis. So what can I tell you about Hachaim HaKadosh? The Baal Shem Tov, which lived in his generation, had a lot of appreciation to him. And even though Hachaim was not known as a Hasid, but it was clear that his approach to the Hasidim was a special approach. We'll see soon. And the Baal Shem Tov said that if he had the zchut to meet Hachaim physically, together, that meeting would have brought Mashiach ben David. That's how we saw it. This was Hachaim HaKadosh. So of course he put together amazing books that until today we learn them. Sefer Hachaim HaKadosh al Parasha is a very common book. He goes through the Parasha in depth. It's beautiful. But I want to show you one quote that he says about the Hasidim in his book. And I'm reminding you that in those days, there was a controversy around the Hasidim. All the mitnagdim, the Shita of the Gaon Mivilna felt like these Hasidim are going after derech, and even if they mean well, people that are going to go after them, it's not going to be right. Look at Hachaim Kadosh approach to the Hasidim. He says, Nes hadegel shel hasidut, what the Hasidim should carry on their head, kematzpen shemar'eh et hakivun al pei ha'okeanos. It's like a compass that is helping us understand what is the right way to go on the ocean, right or left. He had so much appreciation to the Hasidim. Hu hamazon haruchani, it's the spiritual food, hanivchar b'shvil menuchat haShabbat, that gives us the feeling of menuchat haShabbat. So from here we see how much appreciation the Hachaim HaKadosh had to the Hasidim, which is not exactly what was happening in that generation. Now the Baal Shem Tov, every day he would teach his students, but then he would go lock himself in his room. and he would spend hours in that room. Maybe after 3-4 hours, the Baal Shem Tov would come out and continue his day. One day, the students noticed. He walked into his room, he locked himself in, but he came out after a few minutes. They didn't understand. Rabbi, Mechila, what happened today? Every day you spend a long time in there. He said, I'll tell you what happened. Every day when I go into that room, I try to, la'alot b'heichalot, to go up in very high places and connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I have to have a lot of kavanah, and I go up another step and another step until I'm in that place that I get my drive, my energy from, and I come back down. He said, but today, all the heichalot were opened. I closed the door, and I went right up, and I could come back down. He said, and you know why it happened? Because the light of Or HaChaim HaKadosh turned off. He knew without hearing. He knew that Or HaChaim HaKadosh passed away. And he said, and in his honor that he passed away, all the Echalot opened up, and I went in with him. So these are already high levels. It's hard for us to connect, to understand what was happening here. But look at the appreciation between a Baal Shem Tov, the great Chassid, and Or HaChaim HaKadosh as well. Okay, the goal of this was to bring us towards a Chidah. So we learned a little bit about the rabbis of a Chidah, and now who was this figure? A Chidah. Hey, Leonard, Buchim Habayim, Adam, Buchim Habayim. Okay, so now we're going to touch the Chidah. The Chidah lived from 1724 to 1806. The Chidah, Rabbeinu Chaim Yosef David Azulai. He was a Moroccan Jew. You should know, until today, the Moroccans, we've mentioned this before, had a burning fire in them to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and one of the greatest Chachamim came from Morocco. So this Rabbi, Chidah, he was born in Yerushalayim, and he was a Shadar. Shadar of the Chachamim means that he would go to different countries to collect money for the yeshivot. That was he was doing. And usually it's more of a simple person. No, he was a great Talmid Chacham going to collect money for the yeshivot and Eretz Yisrael. He put together over 80 different books. At the age of 12, he wrote his first book called the Agul. At the age of 13, another Piskei Halacha. 17, until the age of 20, he became a Dayan. Now, one of his most phenomenal pieces that he put together, you cannot believe that a man put this book together without a computer. What am I talking about? It's called Shem HaGedolim. This book, Shem HaGedolim, is a list of thousands of books that he knew from his memory, and he just categorized them Lefia Aleph Bet. Oh, letter Aleph, he wrote down maybe 400 books that he remembers that begin with the letter Aleph, all alphabetized. Then he moved to the letter Bet, next. He did this with all the books that he knew, thousands of books. It's amazing to see without a computer, the list of books. And if he's writing them down, obviously he learned them himself. But that's not where it ended. He also did the same thing with the Chachamim. Any Chacham that started with the letter Aleph, he listed him. And for example, when he gets to Ra'avad, so there's a few Ra'avads. The Ra'avad Rishon was this, the Ra'avad Sheni was this. Every letter, hundreds. It's unbelievable. So much information was put into that book without a computer, without Rabbi Google, as we call him today, no Google Sheets. Everything was done from his brilliant mind. We'll see soon in a story about him that his true love in life was books. That's what he wanted. He wanted to learn. One time he was in France. As I told you, he was a Shadar de Rabbanan, meaning the Chachamim sent him all over the place to collect money for the yeshivot. I guess he knew how to speak, he knew how to convince. So he was traveling a lot around the world. We'll see a few places that he reached. One time when he reached France, he was walking around and he saw a little boy drowning in the water. So without thinking twice, Atzalat Nefashot, he jumps and he saves this boy's life. So when he saves the boy's life, where are you from? Oh, here's my mother. He goes to his mother, he gives the boy. The mother said, do you know what life you just saved? He said, no, I don't know. This is the Prince of France. I'm the queen. You just saved our son's life. I didn't know. Amazing. Said, anything you want, I will grant you right now because you saved my son's life. No, lo tzarich, tarof, no, anything you want. Says the Chidah, you know what? Listen to what a man that could get anything he wants from the king that just saved his son's life asks for. He said, I heard that in the kingdom, in the palace, there's a special library. I want permission to go into that library and see the books. This is what the Chidah was asking for. People ask for treasures, for houses, for land. No, I want to go to the library. This was the Chidah. Special character. The Khatam Sofer, one time he learned with the students of a Chidah. He lived a generation after. He learned with the students of the Chidah. And they say, to show how great a Chidah was, that he said to his students, look, if I just studied with a student of a Chidah and I was blown away by him, who was the Chidah? Yeah, it was like, how could you have such a mind? Now I'm going to give you a list of different rabbis that complement the Chidah. They give us an understanding on what level he was. So there's a rabbi called Rabbi Elimelech Milizhansk. I'm sure you've heard of him. He wrote the book Noam Elimelech. He was the brother of Rabbi Zusha. Rabbi Zusha had the famous quote that when I get to Olam Haba, no one is going to ask me, why weren't you Moshe Rabbeinu? They're going to ask me, why weren't you Rabbi Zusha? Which is a very important line, which means that you shouldn't look at others and say, I want to be like them. You should maximize your own potential, because that's going to be the din and cheshbon in Shammai. What could you have been, Mr. X, Mr. Y? What was your potential? Not what was someone else's. That's what they're going to ask you. So that's a famous quote. So this Rabbi Elimelech Milizhansk, he says, Yesh tzaddik echad be'Italia. There's one tzaddik in Italy. He was referring to Achida. I guess Achida was traveling at the time he was in Italy. She'al yedei chiburav ha'teorim, that by his beautiful writings and beautiful books, mevatel kol sefer minut. He breaks down all these books of minut. Minut is referring to philosophy at the time. Again, there was a controversy around it, and they felt like he is bringing justice to the world with his holy books. Another great rabbi called Rabbi Menachem Mendel Miriminov wrote about the Chida, that he said, Achida katav lev sfarim b'kedusha. Lev sfarim means 32. The Chida wrote 32 books, even though today we know that he has over 80, yeah? But we don't have all of them. Some of them were lost. But the Chida wrote 32 books. He says, and these lev sfarim, these books, הם מבטלים את טומאת הלב של המשכילים, meaning the משכילים, Mendelssohn, we said they started a movement that they thought was right, but obviously it brought a lot of people down, it ruined it for many people. So, sorry, I'm being moved to the left. Okay. So, he said, by the books of the Chida, they're mevatel, they're overcoming the evil powers of this Tnuat HaMaskilim that led the sons of Mendelssohn to become Christians. There's a nice story that one of the Chida's meshartot, the servants that he had in the house, she saw he was sitting with 3 people. There were 4 people in the room. So she goes to get them tea. And when she comes back with the 4 cups of tea, he's sitting there all by himself. And he asks her, why did you bring 4 cups? So she said, I saw that there were 3 more people here. What happened to them? So he asked her, oh, you saw them? Which means these were kind of like malachim. There's, I don't know, Eliyahu Navi, who was coming to learn with him. So some people could spot it sometimes. I heard a similar story about Avihem Shel Israel, right? Harav Mordechai Eliyahu. There's a story, there's a book, there's a series of books after he passed away a few years ago about all the miracles that people had with him. Phenomenal. By the way, Lirona and David, my sister and brother-in-law, they also, their story made that book. Lirona is here from her honor. I'm not going to go into details, but they're many miracles that happened with this rabbi. So one of the stories over there is that one guy, I'm pretty sure it's in the book, unless I'm remembering it by heart, but I'm pretty sure it's in there. One guy came and the secretary told him, okay, you could go into the Rav. So he passes the secretary and he's about to enter the Rav. And then he sees that the Rav is sitting with somebody, so he waits outside. So a few minutes later, the secretary says, you're still out here? Why didn't you go in? He says, no, someone is in there. So she said, no one is in here. Oh, no one is in here? He walks in. Secretary leaves and he says, Rabbi, sorry, I waited outside because I saw you were sitting with someone. And the rabbi said, oh, you just saw Eliyahu Navi. It's amazing. These Gdolim, who were they? All right, so if we touched Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, I want to tell you another amazing story about him. Because to be honest with you, Be'ezrat Hashem, this is going to be a class. After this class, we're going to have one final class, which I'm saving for Rav Ovadia Yosef. Our goal was we started from Hillel HaZaken, from the time that the prophecy left the world. We went throughout the generations, and we wanted to get to nowadays. Now, honestly, we're almost there, meaning right now we're talking about great figures and things that happened in the Jewish world, but most big Jewish events that happened in our history that affected us, we went through. So now we're just naming different rabbis that were important, and I hope I'm not forgetting, and for sure I'm forgetting some, but we can't name everyone because there's so many Gedolim for this generation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a few figures that I feel like they had a special change in the world. And whatever time we have left in this class, we'll tell a little story here, a little story that about big rabbis. And next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, I don't know if next week because it's Tisha B'Av, but after that, Rav Ovadia. So now, if we touched already Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, I'll tell you something else about him. This rabbi, Achida, he wasn't buried in Israel, but they wanted to bring his atzamot, his aron, to Eretz Israel. By the way, today he is buried next to the father of Rav Mordechai Eliyahu. Chacham Salman Eliyahu and Achida are one next to the other in Har Zeitim. I've been there. Why? What happened? Because Rav Mordechai Eliyahu himself brought the bones. But he says a story. I heard this from his mouth. On video, I saw it. He says, when we brought his bones, forgive me, when we brought his bones to Eretz Israel, there was an aron, there was the coffin, and he said to himself, okay, we need to לסדר את העצמות. I guess there's a procedure where you have to arrange head, and so you know where to put the head and where to put the, you know, the legs and the body. So he did not know how to do it. The aron was closed. He was scared to open it. He said, what am I going to do? How am I going to know where the head, where the bottom is? We have to bury him. Where will we put the head? So he says, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, that I asked Achida, I said to him, Kvod Rav, please, I don't know how to set your bones. Can you help us out? And he says, there were 3 great rabbis next to me as well. All of a sudden, once he asked this question, there was noise coming in from the aron. All the atzamot were mistadrot inside. He said the 3 rabbis that were with me all fainted on the floor. I don't know how I didn't faint. They all fainted next to me. I was the only one that stayed awake. With my own eyes, we heard the noise. We understood that the chida was misader atzamot in the right way, so that we'll be able to bury him. This is the gedolim, their connection between each other, what they're able to do while they're alive, while they're not alive. Amazing. I want to touch another rabbi that he's one of the Hachaim of Iraq. Rabbeinu Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim in Iraq. He lived between 1835 to 1909, and as you can see, we're already touching the 20th century. The Ben Ish Chai was one of those characters, just like Achida and just like Rav Ovadia, that even in yeshivot that aren't Sephardi, Ashkenazi yeshivot, his learnings are accepted there. They take him in, because a lot of yeshivot, you know, everybody focuses on what they're used to. But there are some rabbis that are able to break borders, that their knowledge is so phenomenal that anyone accepts them. I want to tell you, me personally, with Rav Ben Ish Chai, I'll tell you soon a little bit more about him, but his chiburim are so deep. He has a chibur called Abenu Yada on the Shas. Any page of the Shas that you take, you read a line from the Shas, he tells you an idea. Sometimes it's in Pshat, sometimes it's in Sod and Remez. Very, very deep, very, very special. So this book, I'll tell you my personal experience. I read a few pages of the Ben Yoyada. I was blown away, mamash blown away. I said, I have to do a seder limud on this book. It's a few thick volumes like this. I said, let me start. I started with the first Masechet in the Shas, Masechet Brachot, and every day I was dedicated time. I was taking notes, and I try usually when I start a mission to complete it. I'm telling you that every word was so dear to me, I could not write it down. I had to write down everything. So from this excitement, as I'm learning and writing, I see that a few months have passed, and I move forward maybe 5 dapim in the entire Shas. Now the Shas has 2,700 dapim. I said, if I want to go through this, it's going to take a few lifetimes just to learn this book. How am I ever going to go through this? And the Ben Ish Chai, this is one out of maybe 100 books that he wrote. What knowledge? It's obviously me'ala teva. It's unbelievable. But also the ideas over there. You see where he brings from here. You understand that this is not a normal mind. I hope you're all enjoying the background sounds as I am as well, Baruch Hashem. Okay. So Ben Ish Chai.
That we hear these sounds.
Baruch Hashem. So Ben Ish Chai, the story with him is that when he was 7 years old, a baby in Iraq, a young boy in Iraq, he drowned. He fell into a pool, and his uncle saved him, but he made a promise that if he'll survive this, he'll dedicate himself to Torah. And that's how he started his path. He dedicated to Torah, even though his father was already a big gadol as well. His name was Rav Eliyahu. And we'll see soon, his father, the whole world would send questions to his father. He was a great dayan, and just like we learned in Tkufat HaGeonim, everybody would send to the Geonim in Bavel questions. Once the Tkufat HaGeonim spread, there was different rabbis in different places. Questions would come from all over the world to these rabbis. And the Rav Ben Ish Chai, his father would get the questions. Only one time what happened is that as the father answered, they said, oh, thank you, Rabbi, for your answer, but your son, Yosef, right, Ben Ish Chai, Ben Yosef Chaim, he already answered us a few days ago. And they said, what, you're answering my questions? He was 16 at the time. But not a simple questions, yes, no. You have to bring all the books and the quotes. So he understood, okay, what we have at home is something special. And Liyamim, he did become something special. Until a point where the Hasidim of Belz, they always look at, their Admor, their third Admor, the Hasid of Belz, Rabbi Sachar Dov. He didn't want to write on his father's grave when he passed away, Yechid Bedoro, which we see sometimes, Yechid Bedoro, the only generation. He said, I would have written on my father's grave, Yechid Bedoro. But since the Ben Ish Chai is alive in Iraq, I cannot write Yechid Bedoro. Even the Hasidim of Belz, no, the Ben Ish Chai is alive. There's no Yechid Bedoro. There's one Yechid and it's a Ben Ish Chai. Even though he was so great, he was mamash part of the people of Ben Ish Chai. Every day he would, after the tefillah, stay and learn with the Talmidim, Chok L'Israel. Now, Chok L'Israel is considered like very simple learning, the ABCs. You go through a little bit Tanakh, a little bit Mishnah. oh, he was in these levels. No, but he would sit with the people. He would teach them from the ground because it was important to him, the next generation. One of the only rabbis that we have from our times that had seen in their own eyes the Ben Ish Chai is the Rav Kaduri. Rav Kaduri, they say, lived over 100, some say 120, 112. There are different opinions. We don't always know the dates exactly. But he says in his own mouth that in the days of a Ben Ish Chai, he remembers the Bet Knesset in Iraq that the Ben Ish Chai would talk about. And he says, we were kids, we were sitting around him on the Shabbat, and he would give the Derasha in the Bet Knesset. It was blowing people's away, and we would just try to hold his glima, hold his, the glima that they would wear, and kiss it just to get a feeling of who this Ben Ish Chai was. These are the stories. When a Ben Ish Chai passed away, every Shabbat he would give a huge drasha, Bet Knesset, thousands of people would be in that Bet Knesset, a huge Bet Knesset in Iraq. When he would finish his drasha, people were blown away, and they say that they would hear it also from far. It was something special. After he passed away, who continued his derech? His son. And now the Ben Ish Chai's son is standing up and talking to the crowd, and he wants to say the Rasha. And as he starts speaking, everyone says, hey, lo shomim, we can't hear, we can't hear. So what does he tell them? You think when my father spoke in front of 1,000 people, or thousands of people, with no microphone, you think it was him talking? Shechina medaberet migrono. It was the Shechina speaking from him. That's what everybody heard. No matter how much I try, I cannot reach what my father is. You're not going to hear me. This was the Ben Ish Chai. Everybody saw him like that. I asked my friend Moran, some of you have met him, Moran Chamsi, he's Iraqi himself, and he's a big lover of a Ben Ish Chai. He goes through all his books and every line. So I said, give me something of the Ben Ish Chai that I could share with our class, Be'ezrat Hashem. So a simple pasuk, he says, there's a pasuk says, Iten lecha chivavcha v'chol atzatcha yemale. It's part of the tefillah, it's part of the Tehillim. Hashem shall give you the will of your heart, and he should atzatcha, and he should also fulfill what you wanted. So it kind of sounds like kfilut. Iten lecha kilvavcha. He'll let you what you wanted in your heart. V'kol atzatcha yemale, and what you wanted, he will give you. It sounds like you're saying the same thing twice. So the Ben Ish Chai explains. Example. Let's say a person really, really wants to buy an apartment, but he says this apartment costs $2 million. How am I going to pay for it? So he starts praying, Hashem, please give me $2 million. I want to buy an apartment. Give me $2 million. Hashem answers his tefillah. The next day, somehow the apartment comes to him for free. He got the apartment. Says the Ben Ish Chai, don't think that now because he got the apartment for free, the $2 million still won't come to him. He'll get the apartment, but he'll also get the $2 million. Why? He'll fulfill what your heart willed, that you'll get the apartment. And also what you verbalize that you want the $2 million. Now, why is this important to understand this? Pirushki tzadik gozer, הקדוש ברוך הוא מקיים. The Ben Ish Chai was always trying to say positive things so that the Jews would receive it. We believe that the koach of the words of the Hachaim, since they're so connected to Kedusha, that whatever comes out of their lips is Kadosh, Mimele Hashem keeps it. We were learning in these last parashot about the koach of Nedarim. And the Gemara says that he who has keeps his mouth clean, the koach of what comes out of his mouth is effective. Ben Ish Chai would always give a perush letova, to the benefit of the people, because he loved it. He said, Hashem is going to make it like I said. You get this and you get that. He was supported by his parnasim, by I think it was his brother-in-laws, if I'm not mistaken. No, actually his brothers themselves. His brothers were supporting him at Ben Ish Chai. And as they were supporting him, at a certain time, they went through a very hard time. There was bayot shel kesef, and the noshim came to them. It's a whole story. So at the time, the Ben Ish Chai took it very hard. He said, what? They're supporting me, and now they're getting hurt? So he was metaken a tefillah, a special tefillah for a parnasa and for ra'im that come and try to take money from you. In his book, he has a book called Leshon Chachamim, all special tefillot, special segulot by Ben Ish Chai. And he made a special tefillah because that's what he felt from the bottom of his heart. If they're suffering, even though they're supporting me, see how sensitive he was. He felt the people. This was the Ben Ish Chai. Now, even though if you learn the learnings of Rav Ovadia, we'll see that so many times Rav Ovadia is cholek on a Ben Ish Chai. He goes against him. But chas v'chalila, it's machloket shel Torah, it's not machloket, not of kavod. And there was so much kavod, but they didn't live in the same time. But Rav Ovadia himself says that one time he was debating what to do because he's writing his books, and we know until today, Rav Ovadia's books is used in every yeshiva. Rav Ovadia was thinking, I keep on going into classes, but I'm spending so much time until I get there, until I come back, and I want to focus on my learning, on my books. He said in his book, he writes it that a Ben Ish Chai came to him in his dream and told him that in Shamayim, his books have a lot of reward, but please do not give up on your shiurim because the people need you. Please go out and do it. So if you see, if Rav Ovadia writes this about the Ben Ish Chai, we see where he holds of him. Even though he was cholek on him, but we should always know there's machloket. You're allowed to be machlok. Hillel and Shammai, even though we learned about this, even though they had so many machlokot between them, the whole Shas is filled with machlokot, but they had so much respect between them. They would even marry their own kids with each other. They would eat by each other because everybody respected and kept the halacha. When they would come over, they would give him shchita according to him. All these kavod between chachamim. When there's a machloket, you could still do it in a path of Torah. So now, B'ezrat Hashem, with the 9 minutes that we have left, I'm going to try to touch a few rabbis until we get to Rav Ovadia. We'll see if we have this time to say a story about each rabbi. But an important one that made a difference in Israel was the rabbi of the Tzionut, Harav Kook. Rav Kook, the famous Rav Kohen Kook, he brings very interesting theories. He had a philosophical mind, goes into depth. And I want to share one pirush that I recently learned from him and it blew me away. He talks about the concept of shlemut, being complete. The Gemara says, Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam. Talmidei Chachamim bring a lot of peace to the world. Now the question is, do Chachamim bring peace to the world? If you ever walk into a Bet Midrash, you see two Chachamim arguing about a halacha, about a discussion. Oh, this, that. There's always controversy. What shalom do Chachamim bring? Right? How can you explain that? So in order to answer this question, maybe we'll go to Hillel and Shammai. We just brought them and we said that they had so many controversies between them. And even though the halacha was like Bet Hillel, but why? Why was the halacha like Beit Hillel? So at the time, we asked this question and we gave an answer according to the Chida. If you remember, we said that the Chida said that because they had humility, then the Shekhinah was amongst them. And therefore, every time that they gave an answer, min hastam, this was the answer that Hashem wanted from Shammai. But I want to share with you an idea I heard by Dr. Micha Goodman. He's a famous religious doctor that goes into philosophy. He has a few books about Amor Nevuchim and about, that's from the Rambam and also by Akuzari. He has a few, phenomenal mind. And he brings an idea, and I want to connect it to Rav Kook says. He says, this Dr. Micha Goodman, how come in our text, Gemara, but in school they call it text, our text that is supposed to be the source of our halakha is filled with so many controversies. You would think that this text kanoni, they call it, the text that from there you learn what to do, what's right and what's wrong. Our text is filled with machlokot. If anything, it should be the text that tells you exactly what's right and what's wrong. No, so many controversies. How could it be? What's the reasoning behind this? And he explained like this. He said they one time asked Warren Buffett, how did you become so rich? What was your secret? And Warren Buffett gave two answers. He said, first of all, Baruch Hashem, I was lucky. I don't know if he said Baruch Hashem. I'm saying Baruch Hashem. He said, I was lucky, first of all. But second, he said that a lot of the times people expect something to happen. They wake up in the morning, they wake up at point A, and they're planning to get to point B. And sometimes on the way to work or whatever it is, there's a detour. You're not on your path anymore. What happens to these people? Oh, they try right away to push back to get to B. That they're after derech. They want to go back. He says, and that's a mistake because so many times in life, these surprises that take you to a new path is a much better way for you. Only what I did is I never ignored the opportunities that opened up that I did not plan for. The derech that is not my derech, I said, let me try. Let me see what's happening on that derech. And even though this level ben kodesh lechol, but let's take this into kedusha. Hillel and Shammai, why was the halacha like Hillel? Because Gemara says, you know why? Because when they would say the halacha, they would first makdimim divrei bet Shammai. They would say, oh, Shammai holds like this, and we hold like that. Why should the halacha be like you just because you give him respect? We want to know what the truth is. But the answer is that in our text, the holiest text that we learn from, the Gemara is showing us who are those that we need to listen to. Those that are willing to also accept the opinions that are not like them. The path that is not my path, the Bet Shammai that is on a detour from the Bet Hillel path, no, we're mentioning him as well. Because we understand that there's a possibility that that could be good as well. That's why halakha is like them. They're able to accept something else, according to Dr. Micha Goodman. And I think this connects to what we just said right now. Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam. What was I trying to say? Rav Kook says, and this is how we're getting to Rav Kook, that people tend to believe that shlemut is if we all have the same derech and we're walking in the same way and we wear the same kippah and we're all... And he says, no, we're forgetting that shlemut is not by taking everyone and put them exactly in the same way, but rather, how do you build a building? A building is not just built out of concrete. It's not just built out of glass. you need everything. You need all the elements. You need the concrete and you need the glass. And all of these together, you put them, and then your building is perfect. That's shlemut. And everyone knows that he had a special approach to the chilonim. A lot of people did not accept him, looked at it, oh, what kind of geula is this? They're chilonim. But he said, this is part of the beauty of us. It's a mixture, but we need this and we need this. And everything together creates the shlemut. This is the shlemut of Am Yisrael. This is the beginning of the geula, which, maybe people would accept, people won't accept, but the idea, we see his approach. He loved everybody. His approach was give love to everybody. So this was a Rav Kook. 4 minutes, I'm going to have to choose who to talk about next, Be'ezrat Hashem. Harav Steinman lived until about 100, maybe a little bit more, and one of the stories about him was the Gadol of Dor, the Ashkenazim, that he would go until later ages running around in yeshivot around the world. And his students, one followed him and said, Rabbi, how could you have so much strength to go, I'm 50 years old, you're almost 100, you're running and giving chizuk to everybody. And he told them, you know what I eat every day? Every day I have a cup of milk with a few crumbs of bread, because if I eat a lot, it tires me. I don't eat a lot, so I have strength to run around. This man until 104, so much Torah I learned, so much he's accomplished. If you would see the house he lived in, if you see the beds, same thing with Arav Kanievsky. I had the zchut to go, Hashem Yishmor Oto, Ad 120. I went to his house many times. You see the walls, it's not new. The bed is an old bed, the chair is an old chair. Told me someone that once a builder came to his house to get a bracha, and the builder told him, tell me, I can come with my workers and one day I'll paint all your walls. Let it be new. There's mold here. He said, no, it lasted until now. It's going to be like that for... These are the Gedolim. They didn't care about the materialistic things. That's how Hashem raised them up. When they let go of this world, Hashem said, you're letting go of this world, I'll bring you up high. So we spoke about Rav Steinman. We entered Rav Kanievsky as well. Rav Feinstein. For you Americans, this is important. You're the chief rabbi of America. I heard a beautiful story about him. Maybe we'll finish with this, Bezrat Hashem. Unless we have time for another story about the Baba Sali. Arav Feinstein, one lady called his house on Shabbat, a few minutes before Shabbat, to ask, what time is Shabbat? So she says, is the rabbi there? No, the rabbi is not here. Okay. Can you help me? I want to know what time Shabbat is. So she says to her, the rabbi passed away. You're calling to ask what time Shabbat is? So he says, why are you surprised? She said, 20 years I've been calling the Rav. My father-in-law is getting emotional next to me from this story. I'm feeling the same way. 20 years I'm calling the Rav every Friday to ask him, what time is Shabbat? And he answered me. And he said that you, after 20 years, one time I'm asking you, tell me, what type of question is this? Go look in the Alon, it says the time of Shabbat. Rav Feinstein said, yeah, I'll tell you what I'll tell you. This is how the Gedolim were. They had such humility. They cared for each person. Maybe with 1 minute, I'll tell you just a little thing about the Baba Sali. The Baba Sali, and then next week we'll leave it for Rav Ovadia Be'ezrat Hashem. The Baba Sali, the great Kabbalist, also from Morocco, that lived in our times. A lot of people had the zchut of seeing him. Was disconnected from this world. The Hachaim of Morocco always protected their eyes. They would talk to you without looking at you, and they would see through you even better than someone that looks at you. One story about him is probably the most famous story about Baba Sali is his bottle of arak. He would take the bottle of arak, he would wrap it with a towel so you won't see how full it is, and he would pour everybody a lechaim. And sometimes he would pour 50, 60 cups, and he would keep on going, and no one knows how much is in that bottle. It was a miraculous bottle, the bottle of the Baba Sali. So my rabbi told me this story. Rav Shlomo Chasidi, let us speak for his refuah shlema Be'ezrat Hashem. He said one time, a guy came to him and he said, Rabbi, I want to stay. I have a problem. I don't have any gas and I need to get to Tel Aviv. It's a 2-hour drive. The rabbi said, Ma ba'aya, come. He took the bottle of arak, he poured it into his gas tank. This is a true story. This guy said, I don't know how, 2-hour ride, I was able to last on this gas. And only when I got to Tel Aviv, I went into a gas station and he said, and I regret it so much. I made a mistake. I didn't understand that I just got free gas for life. I could have continued for where was my emunah? The rabbi poured, I could have had it. So this was the Baba Sali. Hashem should send us Gedolim, Be'ezrat Hashem. Next week is Tisha B'Av. Be'ezrat Hashem, after Tisha B'Av, we're going to have another class. We're going to talk about the Rav Ovadia that sums up all the Chachamim that from the beginning until now. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, we're going to devote half of that class to a summary. So those of you who have missed or whatever, a summary from everything that we went from the beginning until the end. We'll touch the different periods, see what we have learned, what we've accomplished. So when this happens in Yirtzeh Hashem, we're going to complete 20 classes of learning Torah together, Baruch Hashem. So I don't want to say thank you and goodbye now. Let's leave it for next time. But until then, I want to wish you all a Chodesh Tov, Besorot Tovot, Shavua Tov.
Chodesh Tov, Besorot Tovot.
אמן.
שיהיו בריאים הילדים בעזרת השם.
אמן.
שנשמע בשורות טובות מכולכם, רפואה שלמה.
אמן, תודה, תודה.